Hello, my name is Monique Ameo Constance, and this is Portfolio 4. We have made it to the end of the year. Dr. Williams, I am so thankful for your class. Um, let's get into it. This is about Christopher N. Dean's For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the rest of y'all too. I'll be honest that I read this book before, maybe about 2 years ago, so I was glad to be able to read it. The first of my research insights are about the neo-indigenous. Quote, the neo-indigenous often look, act, and engage in the classroom in ways that are inconsistent with the traditional school. I love MD's classification of this new age of students and its parallel to the creation of the Carlisle School. Our school systems are steeped in colonial practices, and students of color in urban schools exist and resist in newer ways. I think that term can also apply to teachers of color. I know for a fact my experience in the classroom has been kind of similar to what he has described about the experience of the neo Indigenous. Two, examining discipline. Quote, the school celebrated teachers' rigidity and strictness out of a belief that this was the type of training that would be successful in acculturating Indigenous students to white society, end quote. I reflect on my teacher training, which was generally older Black teachers instructing me to be harsh with students. During my first year of teaching, after a particularly horrid display of classroom management, a student pulled me aside and said, you just have to tell us to shut the F up, Miss Constance. We don't understand, please be quiet. They went on to explain that the way that their mothers and grandmothers spoke to them was very harsh, and which was, new for me. And I I'm not ashamed to say that I enacted these practices of what we believe is to be Black cultural exhibits of control and discipline, which is harsh speaking. The strictness imposed by oppressive assimilation has lasted generations. I don't like being strict, and I think that Black kids need tender love. Three, the veiled perception, quote, but the teacher did not see the student the way she saw herself. What does it mean when a teacher sees a student? When I think of teaching as an art, how does one create an instructional discipline of seeing the student? I believe that the most important aspect is instructional narrative, in which the teacher imparts connection and knowledge to the sharing of personal experiences and socio-political histories. This unveils the teacher to the student, the world, and ultimately themselves. I think that in order for teachers to be able to see their students, they have to recognize who they are and be able to share that with their students, so that the students feel safe enough to expose themselves and that there is an equal playing field in regards to the exposition of self within the classroom space. Three, cultural showcasing, quote, when the indigenous are silenced, they tend to respond to the denial of their voices by showcasing their culture in vivid, visceral, and transgressive ways, end quote. Lately, I will say, Dr. Williams, I've been feeling a bit attacked by my peers, and not in this class, but my other two classes, whenever I write about critical race theory in regards to culturally relevant pedagogy. When I feel attacked, when I write attacked or when I say attacked, I mean to say that I am being met with the standard resistance of people unlearning the foundation of their privilege. This only makes me theorize more. I really feel this. So when I talk about Blackness and someone kind of hits me with the all lives, kind of everybody, I just revert to the blackety black, black, black. And I understand. I understand what MD is saying here in terms of cultural showcasing. Intellectual capability versus culture. Quote, students quickly receive the message that they can only be smart when they are not who they are. This relates to the necessity of decolonization of the mind and the system so that cultural selves are not viewed as the antithesis of intellect. How and when and will we ever get to a space where the poor or the less um, intellectually sounding, the less evolved in speech, so to speak? I don't, maybe even evolved is not the right word. Will we get to a space where the poor and the cultural, so to speak, will be viewed as intellect? Will we not have to acculturate? Will we not have to assimilate to standard white English to be seen as intellectual? I grapple with that, especially with the way that I speak, because I do speak in a way that could be viewed as intellectual, but um, does it undermine those who do not speak as such, especially my students? That's definitely something that I think about. The ways of white folks. I attended the University of Georgia for my undergraduate degree, so I am not naive to the history and environment of an SEC school for Black students. As I encounter white peers who are in their fundamentalist stage of whiteness, I am feeling the urge to study whiteness more, to understand where they are coming from and the ways in which I need to protect myself and students of color. This particular program at Texas A&M University has pushed me to understand the ways of white folks. I have not been in school for about 10 years. I've been working. I graduated my undergraduate degree in 2010. So it has been 11 years since I have matriculated through a school, especially an SEC school. And in all of my experiences with my peers thus far has kind of been just giving me flashbacks, to be very honest with you, Dr. Williams, of just the kind of the microaggressions of whiteness. Reality pedagogy, quote, it positions the student as the expert in his or her own teaching and learning, and the teacher as the learner, end quote. This is important to me as a professional learning specialist and curriculum developer. In urban schools and with students of color, it is important to understand how to create a relationship and how to embed this within the instructional curriculum. How do we teach teachers to allow their students to be instructors as well? How do we teach this to people? Especially, I'm interested in those who are coming from programs such as TFA, Teach for America, who are indoctrinated to this very specific and stringent way of classroom management. And what are the ways and how do we teach this to teachers to allow there to be an open space of an equal give and take of knowledge? These kids, quote, phrases like these kids or those kids were often clearly code words for bad Black and brown students, end quote. I am guilty of having used these phrases. It wasn't until I heard it coming from a white person did I understand these phrases are dog whistles, and I questioned myself about what I meant when I said these kids or those kids. This is why teacher training must include the socio-political history of teaching in urban schools so that we understand that when we use things or phrases like these kids, we mean to compare them to those kids. And those kids are simply benefactors of economic, political, and social privileges. It does not make them better than. But I do think, and I've had to question myself of what do I mean when I say these kids? The teacher's responsibility, quote, the teacher must work to ensure that the institution does not absolve them of the responsibility to acknowledge the baggage they bring into the classroom, end quote. If one is to enter the classroom, they must be prepared to be exposed to themselves over and over and over again. I call my students my soulmates, and I really mean that. They are my soulmates because I view their growth as mine. It has been parallel to mine. They are so pure and open, and teaching makes you the same. An unchecked ego or ism, whether that be sexism, racism, whatever, can block you from a wonderful experience. Pentecostal pedagogy, and these now we're going to the last third of our research insights. I like the way that MD discusses the parallels of the Black church and teaching. I really feel this. When I think of specific good class days, I reflect the electric exchange of energy between student and teacher and content, the ability for students to express themselves and offer insight and redirect only to come around again. This is the alchemy of teaching and something that cannot exist if a teacher does not understand the essence of the students they teach. Teaching is a spiritual thing. And how does one teach spirit? I definitely feel that when I am teaching something that I am very, very interested in, which is literature, which is art, which is Black socio-political history, not even Black socio-political history, all socio-political history, particularly the history of the oppressed. I feel it. And I love how MD discussed being in church, because it is like that, right? You are saying, oh, listen to this. And the kids are like, I heard you. In New Orleans, you say, you heard me? You're right. Like, you understand? Yeah, you're right. And so that kind of call and response that MD discusses, I definitely feel that. How do you teach that to a people or to persons who do not intrinsically have that spirit, who are not intrinsically connecting with their students in that spiritual manner? Next, we have the Cosmopolitan quote: "The students feel as though they are valued and respected, a full active citizen of the immediate classroom place and space they occupy. It may be my ego, but I love when students feel comfortable sitting in my room just to talk. I love witnessing them ease into the space and engage with themselves as a person and their relation to the text or new information. This is when the classroom becomes a safe space." I am definitely the teacher that at the end of the day in the school day, especially when pre-COVID, right, would have 20 kids just sitting in my classroom at 5 o'clock in the afternoon to talk or just to relax. And I love feeling that. And I think that this is how all classrooms should be. And again, that kind of cosmopolitan and exchange of energy is really important and is something that I think needs to be placed and embedded in instructional practices. Communal intellectual growth. The Cosmos Duos that MD discusses is a beautiful introduction for interdependence and community making. I am interested in developing instructional guides founded on communal traditions of the African diaspora. We are people who lean inward to understand, and this is a wonderful instructional practice that also encourages a calm and safe classroom space. If the teacher understands themselves as an elder who is imparting knowledge and guidance to their younger students and sees that connection, this duos, takes place easier. All right, my reflective insights. One, I am an inherent practitioner of Ending's reality pedagogy. I think that most of what he wrote is a theoretical approach to the essence of the relationship between neo-Indigenous teachers and neo-Indigenous students. Reading this has allowed me to understand that teachers also experience the realities of their students, and this is a space in which understanding occurs. Two, quote, that this joy of teaching comes from being so embedded in the same context with young people that you are operating in the same place and space as they are as you exchange information, end quote. I have felt the extreme joy of teaching, the rush of energy as you exchange energy and information with your students. It can be an emotional process to bear witness to their growth. I believe that context should be a foundational pillar of all curricular and instructional practices. And not so much of these kids are suffering and these kids live in the ghettos and these kids are experiencing violence, but of a place of, I also know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to live in a house where there are no lights on. I know what it's like to watch your father abuse your mother. I know what and still have to be a straight A student. If a teacher is unable to live in that context of humanity, um, that's a very missed opportunity to connect with their students. My third reflective insight: as with anything pertaining to diversity, multiculturalism, and teaching students of color in urban schools, I question how these parts of reality pedagogy can be taught to people who are not in context with the communities they serve. This questioning is not if it can happen, but rather how does it happen? How do we get teachers to align themselves with the contextual reality of their students? How do we get teachers to see how to relate to their students as humans and not as these kids? And how long does that take? A year, 2 years? Do they need to be in the classroom while they're figuring this out? These are all things that I think about, particularly as I was reading MD's work. 4. I align with Endine's observation of the battle in which interpersonal and intercommunal disputes are settled. This reminds me of the Liberian cultural communal dispute resolution called Palava Hut, where elders listen to and decide on the grievances of those involved. This form of mediation is needed in disciplinary practices. My maternal side is from Liberia, West Africa, and we have something called the Palava Hut, where you gather. If I have an issue with you, Dr. Williams, we would go to the community elders, we would speak our grievances. Everybody in the community would have an opportunity to listen, and the elders would then hear everybody's side and create and decide on the best way to remediate the situation. And I think this is a really beautiful opportunity within classrooms to do this rather than automatically sending a student out of the class, rather than automatically suspending a student. But that kind of even keeled, calm resolution is really important, I think, in urban schools. 5. Dean's descriptor of the privilege of the language of the neo-indigenous made me reflect as an English teacher in New Orleans. New Orleans is a city with distinct cultural Black dialect, some of which I have taken on in my 5 years living here. Is it disingenuous of me to speak to my students in a dialect that is not native to me? Do I give myself a pass because I'm Black? Code switching is tricky when factoring in historical context and identities. And in the previous slides, you heard me say, you heard me. Yeah, you understand, huh? Right? All of these kind of very distinct New Orleanian ways of speaking that I've had to adopt in order to linguistically survive in the city or linguistically understand. But am I disingenuous if I speak this? Am I disingenuous when I speak this to my students? And what does that look like in the classroom? How does it look like when it is a white person now doing this? And of course, thinking about race, what does this mean? Do we encourage people to code switch, and what kind of lines are we crossing when we push that encouragement? Which then leads me to my last reflective insight, which is the only contention I have with Dean's writing is that some of the pedagogy seems culturally voyeuristic. Yes, it is nice to take the young fundamentalist white male teacher to a Black church, but what does this do in the long run? How is this not just taking him to see how they are without any more sustained insight afterwards? This shows the importance of long form professional developments. I thought it was nice that Dean took the teacher to the church. I thought it was nice that he watched those videos with him. But what does that do, right? Like I could watch a video about I don't know, Oktoberfest in Germany for 6 months straight. Does that mean that I understand them enough to teach them and to be culturally sensitive? I don't think so. And so while I appreciate Dean's approach, I do think that there's a bit of voyeurism in it, and I don't necessarily agree with that. My reflexive insights. 1, much of what Dean says resonates with me as a student in this program, except I experience these feelings of cultural violence from my peers. I am often the only Black woman on a soundboard of white women, and it has been intense and isolating as of late, to be very honest with you. I am the neo-indigenous of which he writes about. 2, how does one teach reality pedagogy to those unwilling or uncomfortable with accepting the reality of the oppressed? This semester, I have encountered what I like to call white resistance to historical truths, white resistance to the experience of people of color, and white resistance to the oppressive nature of whiteness. I'm very tired, to be very honest with you, Dr. Williams. This has been I've just forgotten what it feels like to be in those spaces. I've been in predominantly Black spaces for a very long time, so I've forgotten what this feels like. Kudos to you for working and teaching at Texas A&M. My third reflexive insight, I question the motives of my peers sometimes. A lot of multicultural work appears to me to be white supremacy light, a space where white people center their growth and enlightenment about the experience of others and pat themselves on the backs for their discovery. However, there is rarely a deeper conversation about critical race theory and its relational existence to curricular and instructional practices. I, for one, have been just very sick and tired of, you know, just my peers waxing poetic about diversity and equity and inclusion, but they'll never mention race. They'll never mention gender. They don't want to have those conversations. When we say diverse, what do we mean? When we say equity, what do we mean? Like, who are we including when we talk about inclusion? These are conversations that they tend to seem to want to shy away from. And so the DE&I space, I think, has become just a very padded, safe place and safe space for dominant groups to say, oh, I get it, but not at the levels in which I get it and to which I experience. I grade myself well here. I give myself a 120 out of 120 because I have deeply analyzed the reading and have done some deep personal reflection in the manner in which I teach and relate to Christopher M. Dean's reality pedagogy. Dr. Williams, thank you. It has been a pleasure. I definitely appreciate your insights for all of these recordings and portfolios that I have submitted. And I thank you for that guidance. Have a wonderful day.